Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
I've always been the one who cried too easily during movies, the one who hugged too long and asked too many follow-up questions when someone said they were fine, the one who got called sensitive like it was a disease and not just part of my wiring. Growing up in my family, especially with someone like Nathan as my closest cousin, meant learning to pretend that didn't sting, that all the eye rolls and passive jabs about me being too soft or emotional didn't carve something into my ribs. My grandmother, Eloise, God rest her manipulative soul, used to say it with a mix of affection and exasperation, like she was announcing a weather forecast she couldn't change. Lena's heart is just a little too big for balance sheets, she'd chuckle, and the room would laugh like that was charming, instead of deeply condescending. It's not like I wasn't capable. I went to college. I paid off my student loans. I started a community-based mental health program that's helped more women than Nathan's entire corporate mentorship program ever will. But because I don't talk about money like it's a weapon or a trophy, and because I once sobbed through an argument over a $500 overcharge on Grandma's prescription bill, well, that somehow made me unfit to handle anything serious. Especially money. A year before she passed, we had this Godawful family dinner where everyone showed up wearing the kind of forced smiles you usually see at funerals or fundraisers. I remember the smell of overdone roast beef and Louise's terrible perfume, which was strong enough to peel the paint off the dining room crown molding. We were all halfway through dessert, pecan pie that Grandma burned slightly on purpose, just the way I liked it, when she tapped her glass and made the announcement. She said it like she was appointing someone to organize the church potluck. Calm. Clear. Final. I've decided Nathan will be the executor of my estate, she said. It just makes sense, practically speaking. Lena's heart is wonderful, but it runs a little too wild for all that mess. That sentence still echoes in my head sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth or waiting in line at the DMV. Nathan didn't even pretend to be surprised. He leaned back, crossed one leg over the other like he was posing for a trust fund calendar, and said, "I'll do whatever needs to be done." He always said shit like that, vague, confident, impossible to hold him to. I smiled through it, nodded politely, and felt something twist low in my stomach that I couldn't quite explain. But I never forgot it, and I never trusted him after that. Grandma passed away quietly about 11 months later. No drama, no machines, just a deep breath in her sleep and a silence that somehow felt louder than anything I'd ever heard. The funeral was small and uncomfortable, the kind of thing where everyone says the same dozen phrases and tries not to look directly at the grief. Nathan gave a speech, of course. He always does. Something about Eloise being the cornerstone of our family's values, which would have been hilarious if I wasn't trying to keep from throwing up. The will reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 10 o'clock sharp, because apparently even in death, Grandma didn't believe in sleeping in. The lawyer, a crusty old man named Mark Penrose who'd been managing our family's assets since the Reagan administration, had us all meet at his downtown office. Beige walls, bad coffee, heavy blinds, exactly the kind of place where secrets go to rot slowly. Nathan showed up in a tailored navy suit like he was being sworn into Congress, sipping an espresso and making casual conversation with Mark like they were old college buddies. He wore a gold watch I hadn't seen before. When I complimented it, mostly out of habit, he smirked and said, "Grandma gave it to me last year. Said I should have something important before everything got formalized." That was my first real red flag. Because Grandma wasn't the type to hand out heirlooms early, not unless there was a reason or a strategy. And if she'd given him that, what else had she promised him behind closed doors? Still, I held on to a thin thread of hope. Not because I needed the money, not even close. I make enough to get by, to support the work I care about, to live simply. But I'd spent years of Sundays helping Grandma clean out her attic, labeling old photographs, reading her mail when her eyes got tired. I remembered birthdays, called on holidays, brought her soup when she had the flu and everyone else was too busy. I loved her. I showed up. And part of me believed that counted for something, even if she thought I was too emotional to tally the books. Mark cleared his throat, shuffled the paperwork, and started reading. It was short. Like, insultingly short. Everything was to be managed and distributed by Nathan, who was granted full discretion over asset handling. There were mentions of property, bonds, a few antiques, and a trust fund set aside for charitable endeavors, but no clear instructions for who received what. And my name? Not mentioned. Not even once. No note. No token. No Lena will understand thrown in to soften the gut punch. Just nothing. I sat there, jaw tightening, cheeks burning, listening to Nathan murmur something about respecting her wishes, while he tapped that damn gold watch like a countdown had ended. When I asked if there was maybe another document, something Grandma might have written separately, Nathan laughed. Not hard. Not loud. Just that smug little exhale that men like him do when they think you're about to cry and they've already won. Sorry, Len, he said, folding the will with way too much satisfaction. Guess practicality wins after all. And right then, I remembered the envelope. The one Grandma gave me, sealed in wax. The one I hadn't opened. Not yet. I don't remember the drive home after the will reading, not because I wasn't paying attention to the road, but because every inch of me felt like it was on fire. Embarrassment, heartbreak, and rage all piled into a thick, choking mass that lodged itself in my chest and refused to budge. The humiliation had its own texture, like wool soaked in ice water, wrapped tight around my ribs. I kept replaying that moment in the lawyer's office, the way Nathan sat there like he'd just won a damn trophy for most obedient grandson. That smug smirk twitching at the corners of his mouth as he folded up the will and tucked it into his folder like he was sealing away the last word on my worth. By the time I got home, I'd chewed the inside of my cheek raw and left half a dozen voicemails for no one, just audio drafts I never sent, just me rambling into the static of my parked car. I stayed there in the driveway longer than I cared to admit, gripping the steering wheel like it could hold me together. Finally, I went inside, turned off my phone, and poured myself the kind of whiskey that burns and reminds you you're still alive. The living room was quiet in that eerie way it always is after a funeral or a fight, the kind of quiet that dares you to fall apart. I stood there for a minute, coat still on, keys dangling from my hand, just staring at the bookshelf like something might crawl out and save me. And that's when I saw it. Or more accurately, remembered it. The small oak box tucked behind the row of hardcovers, next to a cracked ceramic figurine of a cat I found in Grandma's attic 2 summers ago. The box wasn't locked, it wasn't meant for secrets, just for safekeeping. I pulled it down with hands that shook a little, sat on the floor like a kid, and opened it. Inside were the usual things I'd forgotten I cared about: photographs, pressed flowers, old postcards, that silly broken watch I wore through college. But beneath all that, wrapped in a thin scarf Grandma had knitted herself, was the envelope. Cream-colored, thick, still sealed in a deep red wax that bore her initials, E.W. I hadn't thought about that envelope since the night she gave it to me. We were sitting on her porch swing in late summer, crickets screaming in the dark and the smell of mint tea rising from the mug in her lap. She'd handed it to me without ceremony, eyes sharper than her failing voice, and said, "You'll know when to open it. Just don't go looking for a hallmark moment. This one's got teeth." At the time, I thought it was some sappy goodbye letter, maybe a few pages of her favorite sayings or a prayer or a confession about some long-lost love. But now that I'd been cut out of her will without so much as a mention, I wasn't so sure. So I broke the seal. The first line hit like a punch straight to the gut. "Lena, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it out of that goddamn hospital, and your cousin has likely done exactly what I feared." It was her handwriting. Her tone. Her dry, sharp, unapologetic voice, speaking right off the page like she'd just stepped into the room. The letter went on to explain everything. She said Nathan had come to visit her twice during her last 2 weeks, both times with a notary in tow, both times pushing subtle language changes to streamline the process and simplify asset handling. She said he brought her soup, called her Eloise instead of Grandma, and talked about taxes like they were the only thing keeping her alive. She confessed she was tired, too tired to fight it, but not so tired she'd let him win in the end. So she made a backup plan. She listed names, account numbers, passwords to 2 accounts I didn't even know existed. She wrote down the title deed number for a small property in Arizona, something she'd apparently kept under wraps for decades. She named me as sole beneficiary to her personal savings, along with instructions to donate part of it to my nonprofit if I felt ready. She even mentioned the gold watch Nathan had smugly flashed at the lawyer's office, calling it his reward for playing nice. And then, at the very end, one final paragraph in bigger, shakier handwriting that looked like it cost her effort. If Nathan screws this up, which I know he will because that boy thinks charisma is a form of competence, you are to read this letter out loud in the presence of Mark Penrose. Do not let them railroad you, Lena. Emotion is not a weakness. It's a damn compass. Let it guide you, then burn the rest. I read the letter 3 more times, just to be sure I wasn't making any of it up, just to feel her voice in the room a little longer. Then I held it up to the light, and there it was, her unmistakable signature, the same looping cursive I'd seen on Christmas cards, birthday checks, and hand-scrawled recipes for decades. And just like that, I realized something Nathan had forgotten. Receipts. Real ones. Handwritten. Dated. Detailed. And signed. He could hide behind paperwork all he wanted. But Grandma? Grandma left a paper trail with a fuse already lit. The next morning, I woke up early but took my time getting ready, not because I was dragging my feet or unsure of what I was going to do, but because I wanted to walk into that lawyer's office fully aware of the weight in my bag and the storm I was about to unleash. I stood in front of the mirror brushing my hair like I was preparing for a battle instead of a legal meeting, smoothing my sleeves down and reminding myself that this wasn't about revenge. Well, not entirely. It was about standing up and saying no. Not this time. Not again. Not when Grandma trusted me with something she knew the rest of the family wouldn't understand. I left the house with the envelope tucked carefully into the inside pocket of my coat, zipped against my chest like armor, and I made a deliberate decision to arrive late. Not dramatically late, just enough to make Nathan sweat a little and wonder whether I was showing up at all. By the time I walked into Mark Penrose's office, the air was already thick with smugness and smug cologne. Nathan was leaned back in one of those overstuffed leather chairs, his ankle resting on his knee like he was posing for the cover of Rich Pricks Monthly, casually sipping from a coffee mug and chuckling at something Mark had probably said 5 minutes before I walked in. He looked up when I entered, and his expression didn't change much, maybe a little flicker of surprise that I was wearing real lipstick and boots with heels, not sneakers and tear-stained eyes. I nodded at them both, said a polite morning, and took the seat across from them like I hadn't spent the night rehearsing exactly what I was about to do. Mark, ever the professional, adjusted his glasses and shuffled a few papers with the sort of quiet disdain lawyers are trained to perform without words. He gave me a brief nod, said something generic about wrapping up final confirmations, and turned his attention back to his desk, clearly expecting this to be a short and uneventful formality. But I didn't move. I didn't nod or thank him or even blink. Instead, I reached into my coat and slowly, deliberately, pulled out the envelope with the wax seal still intact and held it out across the desk. I think, I said, calm and clear, we're not done here. For a moment, there was a silence so thick it could have swallowed the whole room. Mark looked at the envelope like I'd handed him a lit match and a stick of dynamite. Nathan scoffed, shifting in his seat, trying to cover the sudden twitch in his jaw. Mark took the envelope carefully, like it was a relic or a confession or maybe both. He turned it over, examined the seal, and said nothing as he cracked it open and unfolded the letter with the kind of quiet reverence you don't often see in a man who charges by the hour. As he read, his entire demeanor shifted not dramatically, but enough that I could see the change in his eyes, the way his fingers tightened around the paper, the way his brow creased deeper with every line. He didn't say a word until he reached the bottom, then looked up at me with something between concern and confirmation. "Do you mind if I see the envelope again?" he asked, and I nodded, handing it over. Nathan leaned forward, trying to peek at the paper like a schoolboy trying to cheat off a test. "Well," he said, laughing nervously, "that's cute. A little dramatic, but cute." I turned to him and didn't say a word. Instead, I leaned back in my seat, crossed my arms, and stared him down while Mark took his time verifying every inch of what I'd handed him. After a long pause, Mark cleared his throat. "This is Eloise's handwriting," he said quietly. "The seal matches records from previous documents. The signature is consistent, and the date is 3 weeks before she passed." Nathan sat up straighter, his smugness wobbling just a little. "Okay, but so what?" "It's just a letter. It's not legally binding. She explicitly references property accounts and an alternate will," Mark interrupted, his voice a little sharper now. "And, well, there's something you should both know." He reached into the bottom drawer of his desk, the kind that squeaks just a bit when opened, and pulled out a second envelope, this one labeled in that same familiar handwriting I'd grown up seeing on birthday cards and holiday notes. Mark held it up for a moment, then looked me dead in the eyes. "She gave me this," he said, "with instructions to destroy it if no one contested the current will. But this letter changes everything." Nathan's face went pale like someone had sucked the blood right out of it. His hand twitched once, the way it does when he's trying not to slam his fist down like he used to in college debates. "You can't be serious," he muttered. "Oh, I'm dead serious," Mark replied. "Eloise West left us an alternative instruction set, and by her own request, it only becomes valid if this letter," he tapped the paper in his hand, "is presented in the presence of legal counsel." Which, clearly, it has been. I didn't have to say anything else. I just smiled. Not wide. Not wicked. Just enough. Enough to let Nathan know that the games were over and that Grandma, clever until the bitter end, had played her final card perfectly. And the best part? She let me be the one to deal it. Mark Penrose unfolded the second envelope with the same slow precision a bomb technician might use when cracking open a suspicious package, and the moment he laid eyes on the first line inside, I could practically hear the temperature in the room drop by 10 degrees. His mouth set into a thin, unreadable line as his eyes flicked back and forth across the page, and the longer he read, the more Nathan shifted in his chair like a man sitting on a trapdoor he had personally installed and just remembered was rigged to spring. I didn't move. I didn't breathe louder than I had to. I just waited, because I already knew what Grandma had done, or at least what kind of woman she was, and if there was one thing she hated more than cheap coffee and wet socks, it was being played for a fool. Mark cleared his throat after a few minutes and folded the letter carefully in half, his fingers pressing the crease like he needed a moment to decide how blunt to be with what came next. He glanced up at both of us, eyes narrowing at Nathan before turning to me with something that looked a lot like reluctant admiration. "Well," he said, voice low and deliberate, "this changes quite a bit." Nathan leaned forward, eyebrows raised, doing his best to conjure that confident smirk he usually wore like a tailored suit. "It's just a draft, right?" he said, trying to sound casual but missing by a mile. "I mean, it's not legally binding. You can't replace a final will with a letter that wasn't filed properly." Mark shook his head slowly, holding up the envelope. "It's not just a letter," he said. "It's a triggering mechanism. Your grandmother submitted these alternate instructions to me with very specific conditions. The current version of the will, the one that gives you nearly full control of the estate, was to remain active only under the assumption that no direct manipulation occurred in the final weeks of her life." Nathan scoffed, but it came out like a nervous hiccup. She was sick. She needed clarity. I just helped her with the logistics. "That's not manipulation, it's exactly what she expected you to do." I cut in, my voice steady and cold enough to make him flinch. That's why she told me to wait until after the will was read. She knew you'd overplay your hand. Mark gave me a brief nod, then turned back to Nathan, more serious now than I'd ever seen him. The letter we reviewed yesterday, the one Lena brought in, includes direct references to names, account details, and a very detailed recounting of the conversations you had with her about changing the will. The handwriting matches 5 previous documents I have on file. The seal matches 3 previous correspondences verified during notarization. This isn't just a letter. It's corroborated intent. Nathan looked like someone had hit him in the stomach with a bowling ball. He stood up suddenly, knocking the chair back against the wall with a loud scrape, and started pacing like he was trapped in a room that had no windows and too many mirrors. "This is insane," he snapped, gesturing wildly. She was in and out of clarity. She said she trusted me. I've been handling family business for years while she sat back in that old house doing crossword puzzles. "And she trusted you," Mark said quietly, "to reveal yourself." "Which you did." He then reached into a separate file folder and pulled out the official documents, real, notarized, signed copies of the alternate will. Grandma hadn't just scribbled instructions on a napkin and hoped for the best. She'd gone through every legal step, had it notarized and witnessed, and given Mark very specific rules for when and how it was to be revealed. Her condition, in black and white: this alternate will is to be activated if and only if my grandson, Nathan West, fails to behave with fairness and transparency as executor. I watched Nathan's face as Mark read the next part. The estate was to be divided equally between direct descendants, Lena and Nathan, minus executor privilege. However, a portion of Grandma's liquid assets, nearly $300,000, was to be released directly to Lena's nonprofit mental health foundation, earmarked for women rebuilding their lives after trauma. The watch, the paintings, the antiques, all to be cataloged, appraised, and auctioned unless marked otherwise. The Arizona property she had mentioned in the letter? Also mine. A peaceful escape, Grandma had written, for when the family noise gets too loud. Nathan opened his mouth like he had a rebuttal prepared, but all that came out was a bitter little exhale and something between a scoff and a growl. "This is bullshit," he muttered, pacing faster. "You just played her." I stood then, not fast, not with drama, but with the kind of purpose that settles deep in your spine when you finally realize you're no longer the one being chased. "She played you," I said. "She gave you a chance to be decent, Nathan. You failed. You forgot she was watching you even when you thought she wasn't." He turned to Mark, all bluster and desperation. "You can't let this stand. You're her attorney. You work for her legacy." Mark gave him a look so dry it could have cracked a desert floor. "I work for the truth," he said. "And your grandmother planned this a long time ago. She told me, in her own words, Nathan needs to learn what losing feels like. Otherwise, he'll never stop taking." The silence that followed didn't feel like peace. It felt like an overdue storm breaking after a long, dry spell. Nathan didn't say anything else as I gathered my coat and walked to the door, but just as I reached it, he hissed, "You just ruined this family." I stopped, hand on the doorknob, and looked back once. "No," I said calmly. "I just exposed it." Then I walked out with my head high, my spine straight, and my grandmother's voice ringing clearly in my ears like a final blessing. In the weeks that followed the reading of the Real will, I didn't gloat, didn't throw parties, didn't post any cryptic victory quotes on social media, and I sure as hell didn't rub any of it in Nathan's face, though God knows I could have if I'd wanted to. I just moved on, slowly and deliberately, like someone brushing dust off old furniture, making space for something new. There's a strange quiet that settles in after a storm like that, not quite peace, but not chaos either. Just the eerie calm of truth finally unpacked and left on the table for everyone to sit with. I put most of the money away, untouched except for one thing I knew Grandma would have wanted, maybe even expected, something that didn't feel like revenge, but like restoration. I started the Eloise West Scholarship Fund, aimed at women trying to rebuild after life had knocked them around, the kind of women who didn't always have safety nets or people who took them seriously. The first round of applications opened quietly online, and I didn't attach my name to the press release. I didn't need the recognition. It wasn't about legacy points or some kind of sainthood badge. It was about doing something that meant something she would have nodded at with that half smile she reserved for the rare occasions when she actually approved of a choice I made. The rest of the inheritance sat quietly in a high-interest savings account, gaining dust and time, and I didn't touch it beyond a few repairs on my beat-up car and a new roof on the nonprofit center where I worked. That was it. No designer bags, no second home in the mountains, no smug brunches with people who only cared about money when it meant they could use it as a microphone. My life didn't change overnight, but something inside me did, something fundamental, like a bone finally healing after years of being misaligned. Nathan, for his part, went radio silent. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't rage post on Facebook about betrayal or injustice or ungrateful cousins who manipulate the elderly, though I half expected that. According to Marilyn, who only brought him up once in passing, he was laying low and reevaluating his relationship with the family, which, in West family terms, meant he was licking his wounds and deciding whether to stage a comeback or disappear entirely. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. Marilyn, to her credit, came around slowly. She was never the type to pick sides, not loudly anyway, but over lunch one afternoon, just the two of us at a quiet cafe with bottomless coffee, she looked at me over her cup and said, almost wistfully, "Maybe your grandmother really did know what she was doing." I didn't respond right away. I just smiled softly, because I wasn't sure what to say that wouldn't crack either one of us open in the middle of a public space. About a month later, I took a drive out to the cemetery where Grandma was buried. It wasn't a dramatic visit, just one of those instinctual detours we make when the noise in our heads needs grounding. The sun was out, warm but not too bright, and I brought with me a folded lawn chair, a thermos of tea, and the letter that had changed everything. I parked the car along the gravel edge, walked through the rows of headstones until I reached hers, and then made my way to the oak tree just a few yards away. The one we used to sit under every summer with mason jars full of lemonade and long stories that didn't always have endings. I sat there for a while, letting the quiet soak in, letting the words in the letter settle again into my bones like an old lullaby. I read it out loud, softly this time, not to make a point, not for proof, but just to hear her voice in mine again. I thanked her not just for the money, not for the house or the Arizona property I still hadn't seen, but for knowing me better than I thought she did, for trusting me with the mess, and for giving me a way to clean it up on my own terms. Then my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was probably just a spam call or one of those random political surveys that show up at the worst times. But something nudged me, that little gut tap that tells you to look twice. It was a message. No contact. No name. Just a simple, short line. Check the second drawer of the blue desk. The one in the attic. I stared at the screen for a full minute before moving, reading it once, then again, as if my eyes were trying to catch something my brain hadn't yet processed. There was no punctuation outside of the period after the initial. No flourish, no emoji, no sender tag, just that unmistakable tone. It sounded like her. It felt like her. I stood slowly, folded my chair, and walked back to the car with the letter tucked into my jacket pocket and 1,000 new questions buzzing behind my ribs like bees in a jar. The blue desk she was talking about had been in the attic of her house for decades, stuffed with old photographs and broken light bulbs and probably 20 years of junk no one had dared to dig through since before I was born. That desk had drawers I'd opened before, but never the second one. Never the one on the left with the tiny, rusted keyhole. I didn't know what was waiting in that drawer, papers, a journal, maybe a deed to something else, or a final secret she hadn't told a soul. But I knew this much for sure. Grandma wasn't done talking yet.